Transition, the process of change from one condition to another.
We are now at a new crossroad where change is evident once again.
What does not serve us must transform us anew.
Returning to our original state of oneness and true nature of that which created who we truly are.
Confusion was the way of the past. Enlightenment is the way of the now and future. Shedding away the layers of deceit.
We now bring you the transformation of the two who started as one. Our fearless planet never stands still.
Earth has been in a process of transition, and we are not exempt from this remarkable, ongoing reality. Well, hello, and welcome to Real Talk's Transition Radio Show with Mark Angelo Cummings and
Lynna Ariel Cummings. We just wanted to thank you for joining us this evening. We have a really great show planned for you tonight. We have a guest that is going to really share a lot of perspective that we haven't heard on this show in a while.
And a person who's really responsible for my change of heart, and we'll speak about that as we bring her on. Today we have Kristen and Tinsky, and she's all the way in Florida, which is Eastern time, so it's evening for her. We're still in daytime here, but she's a 38-year-old trans woman from Florida and has a 2-year-old daughter and is married. She owns a marketing agency and loves to spend time in Colorado with her family when she gets the chance.
She loves the beach and the mountains. Oh, I love those too. And is passionate about doing good, giving back, as well as all things tech.
And now welcome to the show, Kristen.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both for having me. It's very nice to meet you in person as well.
Yeah, definitely. We were talking prior that I'm very grateful to the conversation. We actually met on Twitter. Forgot what was the thread, but we were discussing something regarding Jordan Peterson, which I used to like. Now I don't like him anymore.
Yeah.
So you've even changed my mind on that. But we had some really deep conversations, and you were very respectful, not like the typical interactions that I've had in the past with other trans individuals. And your bright look in life, the way that you got me to think that I should not be ashamed of who I am, that I should be happy and be able to live my life as I am, changed my way of thinking. It was like night and day. It was like a switch came on. So I'm very grateful to you, and I appreciate it.
I'm very grateful to you as well.
Well, to me, that's really incredible. And I guess I was doubtful before this interaction that my, Twitter arguments really were being heard by anybody. So I feel like you've changed my mind about Twitter to some extent too. And so it's been refreshing to have the conversations with you that we've had so far. And I was excited to talk to you more today.
Definitely. And we don't script the show, so this could go any direction. And we always try to make it a healing conversation for all involved, for us, for you, and for the viewers. And to get people to really think, because I think it's really important for people to take the time to reflect instead of just be angry and fighting. And that has been my world, this anger, this fighting. And I was really fighting myself and angry at myself because I couldn't appreciate the wonderful things in life, like a beautiful wife, the health that I have, just the ability to breathe, things that we take for granted, so yeah, definitely. So let's start from the beginning. That's okay. Usually our way of starting this show. Who was Kristen while growing up? What was your
family life?
Yeah. Let's say, if somebody would characterize you, what would they say about you growing up?
At the time, probably super typical all-American boy. That's probably how most people would have characterized me in my youth. I have a twin brother, so we grew up together. Happy family life. Grew up in a small town in upstate New York. Didn't move around a whole lot. Had a small but close circle of friends. I would say it was a pretty typical and good upbringing. Wasn't filled with trauma or anything like that. But I knew I was trans from a really young age. I think I just, in the early realization, I realized also that it wasn't something that was normal, like quote unquote normal. And so I was really, really good at hiding it. And, so even when I came out in my mid to late 20s, it wasn't, I think it was surprising to most people because I had been so good at hiding it.
So what were the things that let you know that you were different? Let's say when you were starting school, that's typically when people start to get a little bit of self identity, understanding, hey, I'm kind of different from everybody else around me. What were those signs that?
I mean, it's really hard to say in retrospect. I guess I never liked, physically rough play or anything like that. It never became an issue for me, I guess, maybe surprisingly. I guess maybe I can remember a few occasions where I had feelings of I don't want to be involved in this boyish behavior. But, there were plenty of boyish things that I enjoyed playing sports growing up. I think that the trans feelings always were about a sense of my body being wrong and knowing that there was a difference between me and girls and feeling that didn't make sense. It shouldn't be that way. And just always having a sense of it being wrong, and then that always feeling like a problem, but not something that I ever knew I could do anything about. Or it just seemed like something that I needed to forget about or push away or put in a box and not think about. And so I would say I did that successfully for a long time, really long time. I mean, until my mid-20s, really, where I was able to kind of say okay, I have an idea of who I should be, who people think I'm going to be, who I would like the world to see me as, if I'm trying to fulfill some image of this, this perfect man, which I think a lot of trans people do. They have some idealized version of the gender they were born as, and in understanding that that's not really what they want, but they should go try and achieve that anyway, because that's what everybody expects of them. So I think up until my mid-20s, I was just trying to be as successful in that role as I could be. And as successful in my life in general as I could be.
So did you, growing up, would they have said anything about you being more an effeminate young boy, having those types of characterizations about yourself? Or was it more you just felt uncomfortable knowing that this is what you were being told that you were?
I wouldn't say I was very masculine, but I wouldn't say I was very effeminate either. I think I was really well aware of what effeminate mannerisms looked like, and I tried actively to avoid doing them. But I think part of the reason was that I just grew up in a very small town, so everybody knew each other from a very young age, and there wasn't. I think if I had in high school been placed into a completely new high school or something, I probably would have gotten bullied for being gayish or effeminate. But because I had been there for my whole life, I think people just knew who I was. But I was also doing, I was also masking any feminine mannerisms I had to the degree I could, at least. So I don't know. In retrospect, looking back, I'm sure some people thought I was really feminine or gay. I've heard friends from high school tell me they thought I was gay, but I don't think anyone guessed I was trans. I wasn't the type of trans person that was so effeminate from the moment they were born that it was just obvious to the entire world. That wasn't my experience.
And what I find is that a lot of these gender critical individuals and people that are saying that, well, what does it mean to be a woman, or what does it mean to be a man? And why do people think that just because they feel differently that they have to change their sex? And we hear that all the time. They don't seem to understand that there's something deeper than that. There's this knowing Okay, because I don't even like to use the word feelings because they make fun of that. You know, they make fun of the fact, oh, feelings.
Yeah.
But it's a knowing.
It's subjective.
It's a knowing inside ourselves that something is not right. That we are like, it's almost like invasion of the body snatcher. You know, like, okay, somebody is in me that it's not supposed to be. I'm supposed to be something else or someone else. And it doesn't mean that you have to be super feminine, because there are many women that aren't super feminine. You know, I mean, you look at women and there's a massive spectrum. And so it's just this knowing of, and forget the genitals and forget everything else. It's just like this spiritual energy source that fills us, that we know that we're not aligned with who we are. Is that how you felt?
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. And I think the key difference that I see is that it's a permanent feeling, right? Or knowing. It's something that has never changed and will never change. It's just an internal sense of self that I think people who aren't trans have a difficult time identifying that sort of internal sense of gendered identity does exist in everyone, because they've never felt an incongruence with it. And when you do feel an incongruence with it, it's obvious, right? Like that feeling is magnified. And the more that incongruence is apparent to you, the more magnified it becomes. And so my transition was always about seeking like in a feeling of authenticity in my own body. It wasn't necessarily about becoming super feminine. It was always about looking in the mirror and being happy with who I was, with what I saw looking back at me, and with how I felt about my body. And that for me was the path to a successful transition, was that I led with that. It was always about finding authenticity. It wasn't about some very specific destination. It was about just continuing down a path as I was feeling more and more comfortable, and just taking the steps that I wanted to take to feel additionally comfortable. And that was really it, because I ended up ultimately doing it for myself.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that like when you're younger, you just have this sense that something isn't quite right, that something just doesn't work, you know, and you know that eventually something is going to have to change. And that's an inevitable thing that I know for me, growing up in a Christian household, was absolutely scary, because I knew what that meant. That meant that I was going to lose connection. That meant that I was going to lose a lot of people in my life and stuff. So I was dreading it, but also wanting it to happen, you know? So when did it, like, was it something that you just kind of repressed inside of you, that you just, was it in your countenance? Were you happy growing up as you know, became like, you know, got in your early teens and stuff like that? Or were you struggling with?
Yeah, it's a good question. There were moments in like my early, mid, late teens and early 20s. There were moments where it did kind of like overwhelm me. And I was like probably pretty close to coming out and transitioning at those points. But up until like my mid to late 20s, it was always something that I was able to shove back in a box and put in the back of my mind, or focus on something else in my life, work or college or a relationship or whatever it was, something to distract me entirely from it. But as you said, like it gets to a point where you can't deny it any longer. And like I knew all along I was trans. I mean, I knew I was trans from like the first minute I looked it up on like Alta Vista or whatever, like the first search engines were. Like, once I found that word, I identified with it. I knew that's what I was. So it was never a question of whether it were true or not. It was just a question of whether or not I would ever do anything about it. And for the longest time, I thought I wouldn't. You know, this is like something I can live with. For me, it wasn't something I could live with after a certain point. After a certain point, it was, you've committed to living a lie, essentially. You've committed to living as the person that you don't know yourself to be truly. And you can't live a happy life and live a lie. You can't have real relationships and live a lie. So I think that's when I realized, like, if I'm going to have a happy life, if I'm going to have a happy relationship, I need to live authentically. That's the only way that it will work. Because I've tried the other way. And even against my better judgment, I've tried the other way. So I think I knew in my heart the whole time it was never going to work. I was just too scared to take that leap. Because of all of the issues that come with being trans, with the way society treats you, with the prospect of your family disengaging or disowning you, losing friendships, losing opportunities, losing work. You know, there's a million and one things that are hard about being trans. And in order to say, yes, I need to do this, I need to face all of these difficulties, it sort of had to get to the point where I realized that the alternative was even worse. Not that being trans has been worse. It's been a lot better than I thought it would. The whole process was a lot better than I thought it would be. I imagined it to be a lot scarier and more difficult than it actually has been. But I think I needed to imagine that it would be really terrible and still know that I would do it, because the alternative had become worse. And the alternative was living as a fake person, essentially. And I couldn't do that.
And that's definitely something that a lot of people don't understand, because they think that what we're doing is fake. You know,
Yeah.
they think that this is not our authentic self. You see it now with a lot of the gender critical individuals and a lot of the Christian based individuals. They're like trying to get us to like repent and change and go back to the original plumbing, or go back to the original way that you were born as. And they don't understand that biology doesn't define us. Just because we have certain chromosomes, just because we have certain body parts, that doesn't make us who we are, because we have a spirit inside of us, and that spirit knows exactly who they are. You know, and it's hard to put in words, and it's hard to have people understand it, and we shouldn't have to. We should just be able to live our lives without being apologetic for it. You know, it's like, we're adults. It's our right to have the autonomy to be able to live the way we want to live. You know, I mean,
I think if there are people out there, people watching, that have known a person before they transitioned, and then as they transitioned or after they transitioned, I think it's at least from everyone I've heard from, and I've heard this from a lot of trans people realize that you're becoming more authentic, that a lot of the like affectations of your personality that existed before you transitioned, they go away, and you're not just more authentic in your presentation, but in most of your life. And for me, that was definitely true. I just spoke more honestly about everything, and I wasn't scared to share who I was in all of who I am. Whereas beforehand, I think I had like all of these weird hangups that were tied to just being dishonest at my core, which is how I ultimately ended up viewing it. That like living as a closeted trans person was a lie. And you know, you could say I'm fake now because I'm living as a woman and my biology is not genetically female. But I'm talking about a deeper type of authenticity, one that is about my own internal sense of self. And only an individual can define that. And so I know in my heart that I'm being true to myself by living this way. And that's ultimately all that matters. And that's what's allowed me to live a much more full life than I was before I transitioned. And to let go of so much of the pain associated with having to present a false front to people, a fake version of me, right? An idealized version of what I thought other people wanted me to be. And now I just get to be what I want to be.
So how did that work, like in like dating life, with relationships and stuff as a young person? How was that?
So I've dated women my whole life. I had a couple of longer term relationships. I had one pretty long term relationship before I decided to transition. I would say I realized coming out of that relationship, it took me a few years after and some more just dating in between. But I think I realized partially because of that relationship that I would never be able to find a lifetime partner and a truly successful relationship unless I was able to be authentic and be honest about the fact that I was trans. And so, part of what I was talking about earlier is that I think in order for me to transition, I had to weigh the pain of keeping it hidden with all of the repercussions that come with deciding to transition. And one of the repercussions that I realized with not coming out was that I couldn't ever be fully authentic with a partner. And so, I just basically realized, like, I need to be okay with potentially being alone forever and just do it anyway. Because I'm never going to be successful having a fake relationship. So why even try? And yeah, so I think that was part of it. Just knowing that I never again wanted to be in a relationship where I wasn't telling 100% the truth.
So you say you're a twin. How has your twin taken it, and what kind of, I know that twins are very close, so I'm sure you were very close. Did you ever share anything like that when you guys were growing up?
No, I think, so my brother came out as gay when we were in college, and I obviously had no issue with being secretly trans myself. So we already had this understanding, but we didn't talk about relationships or sexuality or gender or anything like that. I think because we both had things going on and we both didn't fully understand ourselves. And so I think we kept those parts hidden from each other. Not because we weren't close. I think maybe, at least for me, it was just because I didn't know what to do about it. And it's not something you can take back. When you tell somebody you're trans, like, it changes things. So I think until I was ready to come out, I didn't say anything. Our relationship since I came out has gotten a lot closer. I mean, we were really close before, but it's gotten a lot closer. I think it was certainly tough for him in some ways, especially as a twin. And we're identical twins, so we looked identical for most of our lives. I think it was weird for him to see my appearance change. I think it was tough for him when I was sort of in the middle of things. But he just showed me love and respect through the whole thing. And, even though I think there were some tough points for him, I don't think it was like overwhelmingly difficult for him to understand or to support. So I was incredibly lucky with the family support that I got. I can't say that's universally true of all of my friends. I certainly lost friendships. Just don't talk to people I used to talk to. But on a whole, I would say I was really very lucky with the response that I got from my family.
You're very blessed because, as you know, many trans people lose their families, their friends, their jobs. It's a very insecure life, from the moment you decide to come out. So, when you and I were having a conversation and you said to me that everybody was on board with you and happy, I was like, well, that's not the typical, I know that with my wife, she lost a lot. And with many of the friends I've had in the past, they've lost a lot as well. It's just, it's hard. Yeah.
I think it's not necessarily fair for me to comment on like a sort of universal transition story, because for me, I got so lucky. And when you're weighing the decision to transition, of course I had fears about my family leaving me. But that didn't ultimately happen, but it does happen. And it happens to a lot of us. And that just makes me respect the people who transition in spite of that much more, because that's one of the hardest things that you can possibly do is to say, this is true about me, regardless of how you feel about it, even if it means that you don't want to talk to me anymore. And it breaks my heart. And I'm so sorry that happened to you guys. It's not fair. It's not fair. And I hope, and I think in a lot of cases, families do sometimes come around when they see us living our lives and living authentically. They do come around, but there are still people out there who don't, and it's really tragic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really grateful, looking back at everything. I'm grateful for every moment, every situation, all of the pain, all the suffering, all the loss. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, every individual manifests their own reality, and we are here to feel. We're here to feel loss. We're here to feel reward. We're here to just to live this life in its fullness. And I think that pain is sometimes our greatest teacher. And I really do think that it's an important lesson that we can learn, that none of us are victims to our circumstances, that we all, have our own responsibility to take on every situation, no matter how traumatic it might be. So I look at things a lot differently from like when we first started talking. I mean, I could feel the regret that I had and the sadness that I had at that time, but I don't live in that sadness or that shame anymore, because I know that I did this. I chose this. I chose to manifest this reality, and I'm blessed. I have a wonderful man in my life. He's incredible, and we've been through a lot of tough things together. And one of the toughest things was dealing with Christianity and where that fit into our lives, because we had, wrestled with it from the very onset of our relationship. But I'm just so grateful. I'm just grateful for every moment.
So what kind of belief system did you grow up with, and did that kind of play a role in your being a little hesitant in transitioning?
Yeah, I grew up Catholic, but not practicing very frequently. I went to church maybe like once a month or something when I was in middle school, and then maybe stopped going in high school. But both my parents grew up Catholic, and my mom grew up with like a very Catholic family. So I think a lot of it was sort of built into her understanding of gender roles and just like heteronormative ideas, and not because she was very religious, just because that was like the culture of how she grew up. So I guess it affected me in that I thought that the idea of being trans would be like a very foreign idea to my parents, but not to the extent that they ever were like, for religious reasons, we think trans people are terrible, right? They were never bigoted towards gay or trans people while I was growing up for religious reasons. For me, I would say, I guess I've gone from believing in a Catholic God when I was a kid to being agnostic or atheist when I was a teenager and college student, to I think believing that there is some type of higher power now, but not the type of man in the sky, religious personified God that is depicted in Christianity or in Catholicism. And most of my experiences with the church and with religion have been experiences that sort of reflected bigotry and negativity and hatred, and using, the supposed words of God as a way to demean, belittle, or discredit people like me. And, we're certainly not the first victims of it. I think religion provides benefits to many people in many ways, but it's also used as a tool of power and a tool of manipulation. And so I think people need to be very careful who they listen to and the sorts of dogma that they adopt for themselves. And I've tried really hard, I think, to to not ever go down a path of thinking that any one person or any one group is 100% right about anything.
Very smart way of thinking, because it does take you down a really horrible rabbit hole that could destroy your spirit, your soul, and your well-being completely. We have been subject to that, and thankfully we're on the other side.
Yeah.
And very happy for it. So take us to the time when you decided you have to do this to live happy. What were the steps you took, and how did it all unfold?
So yeah, from like age 20, 25 to 27, I decided I needed to live alone for like the first time in my life. And I didn't do that going in knowing I was definitely going to transition, but I think I sort of had like an idea in my head that I like at least needed to live alone to be able to fully explore the potential for it. And so after doing that, I started to take steps. I got a therapist. I started to talk to my therapist a lot more about it. And I just slowly realized that the things that were holding me back from transition were all really fear related. There wasn't really a question in my mind of wanting to do this. It was just, what will so and so say, or what will happen, or what will it be like? Not, do I want this or not? It was always something I wanted. It was always the thing that I wanted more than anything else. Right? Like there were times in my life where I would think about transitioning and be like, if I could make that happen, that would be like the ultimate goal. Right? Like the only thing that would matter. If I could accomplish that, I would feel like I had accomplished it. Like it. And I'd still feel like that to a certain extent. Like it was my biggest dream, but it was also my biggest fear. And it just got to the point where I realized I'm so sick of being scared of this. This is what I want. I need to do this. And living alone, I think, allowed me to have the space without other people's input, without having like a daily need to present myself in a specific way to other people. I think that gave me the space to realize that I did need to transition. And then I just took it very slow and methodically. So I got a therapist, and then I decided to get on hormones, and I got on hormones, and then I slowly started doing like laser hair removal and just kept going step by step as it felt right. And every next step felt right. And so I kept going. And, as I said earlier, every step in that direction felt more like I was becoming myself. And everything kind of flowed from that. Everything else in my life flowed from that. When I was able to start living more true to myself, things started falling into place for me in a way that they hadn't really before. Certainly there were lots of difficulties in like the first couple of years of transition. It was like a very awkward time. But I think I felt like I was doing a lot of real personal growth during that time. And like for a lot of reasons, it was a happy time. It was a really scary time, but also a really happy time because I felt like I was facing my fear every single day. And that made me feel really proud.
And that's important, that empowerment, that feeling of pride. And I know that in the religious circle, pride is a very horrible thing, but they don't understand that that is a very positive thing, because feeling down in the dump, feeling like you're worthless is not a good feeling. So having pride in yourself and the things that you accomplish is something that I believe is one of the greatest things. I don't know why they make that, the Christians make that seem like it's the worst thing in the world.
I mean, I could so resonate with what you were saying about that thing that you wanted to do with your life someday. Because I remember as the years would go by, I didn't transition until I was 43. But I mean, it was like ongoing. I felt different from the time I was little and, getting older and everything. And then having started a family, I felt responsible that I needed to do the right thing and do what God wanted me to do and everything. And I really thought that I was going to get cured or something, that I was going to get fixed by having children or having gotten married and stuff. And because my number one goal was to be obedient. And I thought, well, I could just, God and me, we could just live with this thing. We could deal with it. And then somewhere along the line, it just became unmanageable completely. But it was always this thing where it was like, is this the year? Is this the year? Am I going to do this? Like, I remember it was like New Year's Eve. Every like January 1st, I'd be like, could this be the year that it would happen? And eventually it just got to the place where it had to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how it was for me, for sure. And I think every year that it went on where it wasn't the year that I did it, it started to take a toll, right? It's like it starts to wear on you. It starts to wear on your self-esteem, for me especially, because I always wanted to be an honest person. That was always huge for me. And like feeling like I was being dishonest with the people that I loved the most was crushing. Like how it didn't matter ultimately what I achieved before I transitioned. It never felt like I was really showing people the truth. They were just seeing this person I had created, um, and I wanted people to see the real me. I didn't want to have that feeling anymore of I have this secret and I'm lying and I just can't tell you because I'm too scared. And that's the biggest relief. That's been the most positive aspect of transition period, is not having that feeling anymore. That feeling of hiding, that feeling of inauthenticity.
It's freedom, true freedom to be who you are without worrying about what other people think, because people aren't always going to be all, hooray with what we do. But as long as we're at peace with ourselves, and I think that's what a lot of people are missing, in life. They think they owe other people something. They think they owe this God something. They think they have to be obedient and live life as a martyr, and they're miserable, and I think that's why it's so important to have people like yourself and the guests we had last week share the authenticity, share that, hey, I'm the happiest that I've ever been. Now, when you and I were having a conversation on Twitter, you said that you became more successful once you finally were living in your truth. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So my brother and I and my brother's partner, we had started a business like out of college doing marketing work. And we eventually ended up starting an agency that was like going okay for the first few years. And then right around the time that I, like maybe within 6 months of coming out, we got an offer to buy our business, which was unrelated to my transition entirely. It was just, fluke that it played out that way. It didn't ultimately end up being a good business deal, but what did end up happening is that the three of us moved to Tampa, Florida to join this company. And like this was at the very start of my transition. So like that was a really tough time, but it was also the time where I was like pushing myself the most, where I was fighting to be authentically me. I was putting myself in difficult situations, in cringy situations, in awkward situations, and just leading with my brain, just speaking what I knew about, and not being afraid. I at least to the extent that I could at the time, I was just able to put other people out of my head and say, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. This is what I know. This is a value I can add, from a business perspective, or even from a personal perspective. And then let people take me or leave me, or take my business or leave my business. And I think as a result of that feeling of like, of freedom from the restrictions that I had chained myself with for all these years, I broke through a lot of the things that had been holding me back. And I can't say, my transition was 100% the reason that like my business started doing better and like I had successes in other areas of my life, but it really feels that way. Within a year or so of beginning my transition, I met my partner Kelsey now, who I'm still with. And, I know that what she was attracted to was me being me, fully me, unapologetically me. And I would have never met her if I hadn't done that. And so I feel like I can look back and point to a number of different instances that kind of grew out of this decision to be more open about who I really was in every aspect of my life. That opened the doors to relationships and opportunities that I don't think would have happened otherwise.
You really do like kind of like trigger these memories that I have of like when I first those first few months or 6 months of transition back in 2014 that I had, where I felt like I could be more expressive as a person, that I could like explain myself. I was more verbal. I was more communicative. My I was a working camera person, so I was freelance, and I remember I came out on the job and everything, and you know, it like got better for me. Other than the Christian clients that I had, it literally got better for me because I just felt like I was sharper. I was better at what I was doing because I was at more peace with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very empowering, because I knew that I was being authentic. I was being honest, and that's one thing that you talk about is the need to be honest about yourself. And I think that's what gets misconstrued a lot of times by Christians or, gender critical people, is that they think we're not being honest about ourselves. And that couldn't be furthest from the truth. I know in my life that couldn't be furthest from the truth. And I know that the way you've, told us your story, that's the same thing.
No, yeah, it is honesty. It's the ability to live honestly and to face my fears and be honest despite my fears was, I think, what allowed me to improve my life in a million different ways, because I wasn't living in a fearful state anymore. And when I came out, I realized I was capable of overcoming a fear of a magnitude that I thought was completely insurmountable. And to be able to do that, to take something that's been something that you think you will die with as a secret, and then to realize that you're not going to, because you did it. You were truthful. Despite all of the fear, you still did it. To know that about yourself and to move forward from that place was it was a big personality change for me, because I knew something new about myself. I knew what I was capable of doing. The scariest thing I could possibly imagine, I did. And that changed a lot for me.
It's very empowering, and people don't understand the empowerment of finally doing what feels right in your heart, finally realizing and living your truth, and not caring about what other people think. Very few people are authentic in the things that they do. They do things to please others, and they think they're doing something good. But if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anything. And that's just the way it works. And being authentic is very important, and it's a part of our spiritual growth. See, a lot of people think that refraining from and groveling to a God, that brings them some sort of greatness. And it's on the contrary. That's why people are so depressed. They're addicted to all sorts of substance, because they can't be real. They can't be truthful. And if you can't look at yourself in the mirror and really be truthful with yourself, then you're going to have a lot of problems.
I mean, wasn't it like the ultimate form of repression to live your life inauthentically the way you were living it? I mean, because repression is something that is so destructive for anyone, to repress anything. I mean, if you're angry, you should let it out. If you're, if you have a problem with someone, you should talk it out. I mean, all of these things. And I think that a lot of times in society, the reason we have these increasing rates of cancer and disease and all these heart problems and all these things that are ailing us is because people live repressed lives a lot of times.
Yeah. I think repression is ultimately a deadly thing. I think you can only keep it up for so long. And I feel for trans people that are the way that I was, that have the type of fear that I had, but then have, these religious chains holding them back on top of it, where even if they could overcome, you know, the level of fear that I was experiencing just in terms of worrying about like social rejection and all of those things, they're also feeling like this is a question of their existential worth or their future in heaven or hell. I mean, I can't even imagine how tough that would be. And the guilt and shame that gets layered on top of people, it's no wonder that there are, you know, the suicide rates that trans people have. And I think a lot of them we don't even ever hear about because they were closeted people and they were never able to tell anyone.
And they weren't, yeah, go ahead.
No, it's terrible and it's tragic. And it makes me sad that for some people they never get to the point where they can see through it and see to the other side and see the benefits that lay on the other side of overcoming a fear like that.
And even after they transition and they've done everything, they're still not capable of being happy or not able to, because they're still holding on to that religious belief, that shame that have been placed there, and they can't let it go. And I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing a lot of detransitioners nowadays, because of that, because they were never really accepted by their families or by their belief system, and they're fighting it. And so they can't be happy. So what's the next step? Well, they have to detransition. I know that's why I did it for 6 times until finally I was like, I'm tired of this roller coaster ride. I need to come off and I need to be happy and I need to just be who I am, unapologetic. What do you think is the number one reasons people are detransitioning now? I mean, because we're seeing a lot of people, all of a sudden it's like the pendulum. And I don't know if it's the hive mind, because that's what happens with, especially with teenagers, it's like this hive mind that's taking place, that all of a sudden people are detransitioning.
Was there a social contagion aspect to this in the last 10 years that possibly didn't exist prior?
I think the last 10 years, the visibility of trans people has exploded exponentially. And when you have something like that happen, there's never going to be like just one side of the story. It's never going to be an entirely positive or an entirely negative thing. In my opinion, it's been way more positive than there are negatives associated with it, for the pure fact that so many more people now know a trans person. There are so many fewer closeted trans people. There are so many fewer people living in the sort of state that I lived in prior to coming out, which was a very painful place to be. And the idea of social contagion, I mean, obviously social contagion is a real thing. It happens in many sorts of different situations and scenarios. I mean, there's evidence of social contagion in all sorts of different types of moral panic and even some somatic related diseases. So like, it's a real phenomenon, but the question isn't are there some people who thought they were trans because of being influenced by their peers or knowing someone close to them that came out and just having very unstable, self-understanding. Certainly there are specific people that happened to. But what we really need to be talking about within the context of this is, what is the volume of people who benefited from transitioning and living in a more authentic way? And what is the volume of people that feel like the visibility of trans people led them to make a decision that was not right for them? And I think that it's difficult to suss out on social media because rarer voices often get amplified, especially if those voices can be utilized by one particular viewpoint to spread a specific message. So I think some detransitioners have been leveraged by people with a specific motivation to paint trans people as wishy-washy or manipulative or groomers or predators, or however they want to frame us in a negative way, and say, here's a group of people that we can point to that feel that they were negatively impacted by the public trans voices that exist that are talking about transition in a positive way. I think that there's a small percentage of people that maybe fit into that category of, I transitioned because I thought XYZ social thing would happen to me that would be positive. And it ultimately had nothing to do with their internal sense of gender It had more to do with outside factors of how other people were perceiving them and the benefits that they thought they may have as a result of transitioning.
Well put.
I think that there are also, in the last 10 years, we've also realized that there are a lot of people that exist in an intermediary state between gender identities, that there are people that legitimately don't feel like they fit into a male or a female box. And I think what we're seeing is like a society trying to navigate language surrounding the identities of this group of people that were mostly hidden from us before trans people became more visible. And so now, things like pronoun usage are being also used, I think, as a way to paint trans people as trying to change the culture, when the reality is we're just all learning that there are more of us that exist, not outside the binary, but just in between the binary. Somewhere between male and female is where their identity lies, and it's difficult for them to say, I want to choose one or the other. And I don't have any problem with that, and I don't think it's really that much to ask to add they, them to the lexicon. But certainly I also think it's been taken to like the nth degree with 10 million pronouns, that it's unrealistic to think that society would ever mass adopt this multiplicity of identities. I don't think it's ultimately serving us to try and define ourselves to the nth degree as this super, super specific person with a million titles listed by our name. I think it just kind of serves to separate us, and I think weaken our voice and our message, and allows conservatives or people who are trying to paint us a certain way to do it more effectively. And so I think as a community, we just need to be careful about what hills we want to die on, I guess. Bad turn of phrase, but I think we need to be aware that there's like a practicality to the situation, and that we need to meet people closer to where they are and not expect them to be able to make a massive leap in an incredibly short period of time. And I guess that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I think people are evolving in ways that they never even dreamt of that they were going to evolve. And I think there's still the dinosaurs, the conservatives out there that can't handle that. There's black and white, biology is this. And they don't realize that this evolution is taking place, and that the species is growing, is changing, and that there's not one size fits all, and we can't place everybody in a box. And I think, they're using detransitioners, and they're using people who want to use they, them, and they identify differently as a tool to push their agendas. And their agenda is always filled with some sort of hatred and some sort of like discrimination, and trying to like paint us all as crazies. And look at all these people that are detransitioning, so it has to be wrong. And it's like, no, I mean, maybe some people should never have transition, and they should have thought it out a little bit more. And they don't need to blame the medical system, because the medical system is giving them what they want. So all of a sudden now it's like, their doctor is their doctor's fault, and they're going to sue their doctor. But did anybody put a gun over your head to do what you're doing? So we all have to be responsible. We all have to try to coexist as best as we can, and stop like pointing fingers at one another and making this be a target.
I mean, the given report survey that had been conducted recently said that 5% of people who do choose to transition will detransition. And they were painting in this conservative news report on Fox with a detransitioner, the fact that the number could be 6 to 30% who detransition. Well, that leaves a whole whopping 70% of people who are happy, who are living fulfilled lives, who don't regret what they did. And last time I checked, that's 3/4 of the population.
Right.
I also think that it really goes to also affect the fact that 50 years ago, 90% of people claimed to be Christians. Now that number is down to 64%, and it's going down to like 24% in a couple decades. So I think there's a change happening in society. We're not buying into the programming like we were being taught to believe anymore. Um, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with that. I think it's always going to be difficult to be a trans person in this world. But we need to look realistically at the data of the situation and not take specific anecdotes or stories as representative of an entire population. We need to be data driven when we understand this. And certainly there are more detransitioners now because there are way more out trans people. There are more people who transition in the last 10 years than there have ever been. But as you said, even at whatever Fox News or whatever biased news outlets position that maybe up to 30% of trans people detransition, which is, it's obviously wrong. Even if that were the case, that's a very high success rate for something that's so transformative, right? And it always strikes me as sort of bizarre in some ways that conservatives, or at least libertarians, some of them, have issues with trans rights. Like, this is a question of bodily autonomy. This is a question of whether or not a human being should be able to change their body in any way that they want to. And it seems hard to be a freedom-loving person and imagine that that shouldn't be the case. And so, I don't know what the most successful argument will eventually be that will turn people from seeing trans people as, a bad sign for democracy or a bad sign for America, into seeing us as people who are living, at the edges of what's allowed in terms of personal bodily autonomy and freedom. But I think it's a right that we all need to care about. And fighting for trans rights is fighting for your own, I think, for your own freedom too. And I wish more people would see it that way instead of seeing trans people as having some sort of agenda. Like, what agenda? Like, I didn't become a trans person to influence other people. I just decided I couldn't live a lie anymore. And all the trans people I know feel that way too. And the only agenda we have is fighting for our own rights, to live as we want to live without danger and without, undue punishment for simply existing. And that's not a big ask. And it's strange when it is painted as a big ask. Especially in the face of people who claim to want the most freedom possible.
Exactly. And then, you get groups, like gender critical groups and the Christians that, make this their motto, we are their source of hatred. And then now they're utilizing children as their shield, we're doing this to protect the children. And, it's like, yeah, it's understandable. No one should really want a child to be medicated and transition until they reach a certain age of knowledge of their own ability, but to use the children as shield, because that's what they're doing. And they're really riling people up and making people angry and creating all sorts of lies and information to do so. I mean, what do you think about that? What do you think about this whole fight now that's being created regarding the children?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obvious that anti-trans people are using it as a wedge issue and as a method for painting us as close as possible to child abusers as they can, or this term groomer that has become popularized in the last few years. It's a propaganda attempt, right? It's to create a mental association, and it's obviously not true. It's obviously not accurate. It's like a very trite thing to try and do because it's been done in the past. It was done to gay people since the very beginning. I think it's a very difficult question, the question of transgender kids. I think that your identity is not stable when you're a child. I think that there are instances of kids that think that they might be trans when they're younger and then discover later that they're not. I think any sort of medical intervention needs to be taken incredibly seriously and with the oversight and support of really well-informed and well-trained doctors and therapists. But I think having some sort of like blanket ban on it, or also making it incredibly open and easy to do, those are both the wrong answer. This is a medical thing that needs to be taken seriously, especially for young people. Surgeries and hormone treatments do permanent things to your body, and the repercussions of those things need to be fully understood. But I think it's also wrong to say that kids can't know that they're trans, because I certainly did. I certainly knew I was trans from a young age, and it didn't change for me. It was completely consistent for me throughout my entire life. And I think for most trans people, that's true. But I can't necessarily say I wish I had transitioned as a teen. I don't know if I would have been ready for it. To a certain extent, I didn't know myself well enough to be able to make that decision for myself yet. And while I would have loved to have come out as a teen and been able to maybe I would have been able to figure myself out faster if I had come out as a teenager, and then I would have transitioned earlier, maybe in my late teens or early 20s. In retrospect, I wish that sort of thing could have happened for me, but it would have been the product of more openness, more communication, more opportunities to be able to talk about myself and how I was feeling. Seeing more open and out trans people and having it destigmatized, that would have led to me figuring it out faster and sooner, and maybe having had the benefits of transitioning earlier. But there are kids too that obviously it helps them to be able to have transition before they were finished with puberty and they were able to pass better. And so it's a really tough thing. It's a very individual, specific instance needs to be evaluated with all of the things that come with that specific instance. And there's no blanket answer. And it's convenient, I think, because it raises everybody's alarm bells, and it's an easy tool to propagandize against trans people with. So I understand why it's become the issue that it has. And I think sports are a similar situation, but we don't necessarily need to talk about that.
No, we can. There's been maybe a handful of trans women that have.
Yeah.
So it's yes, it can be a problem, but is it really that big of a problem for it to be so publicized and so mainstream and so, pitchfork witch hunt type of scenario? Like everything that gets politicized, it gets enhanced and bullhorns, and everybody gets all angry, and everyone's in the Times Square there, wanting to burn the witches, and people need to chill out a little bit, not really get so upset at things, and understand that we're not out there promoting things, and trans women aren't trying to invade women's spaces. There are some exception to the rules, and there are people that do have problems, but on the average, no. On the average, I know you just want to live your life. My wife just wants to live her life. No one wants to sit there and peek at women's stall, and not every trans woman wants to compete against women. They're really exaggerating, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's all to a certain extent a product of the way that media works today, and the way that social media works today, and the way that algorithms deliver things, and that clicks and views and engagement are the metrics that ultimately matter. And so the more sensationalized or the more fear-inducing a particular story is, or a framing of a story, the more it spreads, and larger it spreads. And then eventually people have this perception of different communities being sizes or distributions that are not accurate at all. You know, it would be a very interesting thing to see how many detransitioners people think there are in the world, and then how many there actually are, or how many trans people there are in the world versus how many people think there actually are. I mean, still, when you talk to any random person on the street and ask them, do you know a trans person personally? Most people say no. I mean, there are not that many of us. And our stories, especially negatively, I think, are misrepresented in terms of volume in the news media and in social media because it's sensational, because it's different, because it can be wrapped in these stories that stoke fear or disgust or religious indignation or whatever else. We're emotionally evocative by existing, and I understand that, but the result is that our distribution is not really seen for its reality. And it's sad that that's used as a way to paint us as scary or dangerous.
I think that we also can look back at how far we've come, because I was speaking to a friend of mine who transitioned, oh gosh, back in the mid 70s, I think. And she talked horror stories about the exposure if someone knew you were trans. I mean, the dangers, the out, like, life or death situation that would cause, that would pose for you. Mark could tell you about getting his ID changed in 2003 and how difficult that was. Things have really come a very long way, and trans acceptance has really come quite far in a rather short amount of time. And I think it's an amazing thing, and I think it's tied generationally too. I think that the younger the generation is, the more accepting they are. And that is a transformative part of society, is that society will change eventually, because it's just baked into the DNA of the younger generation. They just don't think the same as a kid that was born in the 60s or 70s or 50s. I mean, these are different times, and people just they just don't think the same.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And I think it's because so many trans people have come out and have lived open lives that our visibility is now allowed for people to, a lot of people, not everyone, because we're talking about all the ways that I think this still happens, but a lot of people are not freaked out by trans people in the way that maybe they were, or they don't see us as a caricature that maybe they had previously seen us as, when all people saw trans people was Jerry Springer or tabloids or random scary news story here or there. Like, there are so many more stories that show us as normal people living normal, good lives. And the more representation there is like that, I think the further we can push this normalization of people like us, which is what it should be, because we exist whether or not people want to acknowledge it or not. And we have always existed, and we will always exist. So, I hope we continue seeing a move that direction. And I think as more trans people come out, more will come out. But I also think that we're going to face situations where there's backlash, where there's an upswing of acceptance and then a downswing and backlash against us. And I think we're in that moment now where there is starting to be more backlash, and we're starting to see people using trans people as a political weapon. And we need to fight against that hard, especially I think because trans people are so vulnerable to it, to being pushed back into the closet, to being beaten down to the extent that they feel worthless or don't want to be in this world anymore. And we need to keep reminding each other that our visibility is important. And the more of us stay visible, stay talking about the good lives that we lead, stay talking about the things that are important to us and what our lives have been like through transition, what we've learned, what we've overcome, how we've become better. Like, if we can keep telling those stories, I think we can just make some of the arguments that are used against us seem stupid or incomplete and not the whole story. And so, like, doing this, I haven't really done anything publicly in maybe 6 or 7 years, but I want to do more, because I feel like if now is the time to really start doing that, to be talking again and telling people that these narratives that are being pushed today, this backlash that's happening, it's not right. It's not true. And we can do a lot better.
And the ones that regret their transition, and there are some out there, it's like sometimes things happen. You take a chance, you take a gamble. It doesn't work out, but just because it didn't work out for you doesn't mean it's not going to work out for other people.
Yeah.
And just because, the medical industry is being more supportive and there's more education on this because they don't want people to be uneducated on this issue, it doesn't mean that they're coming after your children. They're trying to groom. I mean, this is just exaggeration, and people need to see that this backlash is an exaggeration because they're so afraid of where we have gotten. We have made massive strides. So, like you said, you just need to be more visible, and we need to speak out more and with kindness, because it's important to be kind. That's why we've given detransitioners a platform to share their story. But
I think it is important to share the stories of detransitioners. As we were talking about earlier, this is an incredibly serious decision to make, and it's not something anyone should ever take lightly. And it's something that every trans person needs to be completely and fully informed about through every choice that they make during their transition. The risks involved, how it's going to change your life, how it's going to change your relationships, and understanding that there are people that eventually decide it wasn't for them. Hearing their stories and the reasons for why they decided or figured out that it wasn't right for them, those are really important and valuable things for people to hear too. And some people will identify with that and say, okay, maybe I'm deciding to transition for a reason that's similar to this person that detransitioned later and figured out that wasn't the right reason. Maybe I'm doing it for someone else, or for some reason that has something more to do with not a sense of internal identity, but a desire for something else. And as long as we're also challenging detransitioners to be fully honest about the reasons why they're detransitioning, and how much of it is motivated by feelings of religious guilt, or motivated by family members who are telling them it's the right or wrong thing to do, or motivated by the pain that they're feeling, or society, or whatever other many reasons there might be contributing to a decision to detransition. It should always be about seeking a more authentic self. And if that means detransitioning toward a position that feels more authentic to you personally, that's what I support. So to me, it ultimately doesn't matter where people end up. It's just, are they being given the chance to pursue their life continually, not just once, but continually, toward a place of increasing authenticity, increasing sense of value, feeling like they're able to more and more be themselves and contribute more of themselves to the world. And that can only be done when you feel like you are really yourself, and you're not living as someone for someone else. To me, it starts with that. If you don't have that, you can't go anywhere.
Exactly. And, not have this sense of doom and regret in a point of like they just want to destroy and bring down the entire system because they feel it didn't work out for them, that they shouldn't be offered for anybody else. And then their stories get picked up by the conservatives, by, Fox and Matt Walsh and all these individuals that are just wanting to bring down the trans stories, the trans lives. If they could snap their fingers and have us disappear from the planet, they would. But we're not going anywhere, like you said. So they either have to get used to it, realize they have to share this big blue planet with all of us, and and just make peace, and that goes for detransition. Make peace with your decision. It didn't work out for you, then go back to being your authentic self if that's what you think your authentic self is. I know I tried detransitioning, it didn't work out. This is my authentic self. This is what makes me the happiest. This is what fits.
And
living
I think there's room for people out there who spend most of their lives switching back and forth if that's what makes them happy. There's actually a really interesting person on TikTok that has transitioned back and forth a bunch of times, and it's kind of a refreshing like video series, because they look back on it not with like regret during the periods where they were like one gender or the other, but just kind of like an interesting retrospective on their own life. Like I was living this way during this time, and then I was living this way during this time, and it felt authentic to me at the time, and then I moved on and I lived this way. And I think for people that exist somewhere in the middle, that's how they live most authentically, is by navigating a changing sense of internal gender identity. And that's a perfectly legitimate thing too. Like why do we have to be scared of people that go back and forth? I don't think that we need to. It doesn't necessarily say anything about you or me or anyone else. If what we're focusing on is just being true to ourselves, whatever that means at any moment, that's what we need to be doing, is following our sense of true self, of real internally felt identity. And that's what I've always tried to do, and I think what you guys have always tried to do too. It just gets clouded and confused by other people and their opinions and the things that they put on us. But it's usually pretty clear if you search your heart.
So as far as like your family, the relationship that you have with your partner, and you even have a child. I mean, This is beautiful. This is the story of a life that has decided, I want to live. I want to be happy. I want to be fulfilled in this life. How is it reflecting for you?
Well, I met my partner, Kelsey, when I was maybe like 4 months into transition, but I was still living as a guy, just like an increasingly feminine looking guy. And, I told her, I came out to my whole office. I told her very quickly after I met her. And then she pursued me, which was incredibly surprising to me. It didn't, when I decided to come out, like we were talking about earlier, I did so with the worst possible result in mind, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend. Like, don't anticipate the worst. But for me, I kind of had to, in order to get over the fear. I had to be okay with the worst outcome. And so I'd sort of like resigned myself to maybe being single forever. And then I all of a sudden wasn't. And she's loved me from the very start. And I never felt anything other than just a sense of wanting to continue down the path that I'd taken of looking for authenticity and living true to myself. And that's what she respected about me, and that's what she loved about me. And, that just ended up making our relationship incredibly solid from the very beginning. And, I told you when I started my transition, I did it in like a very methodical way. So like I did sperm banking before I started hormones, because I knew that maybe I wanted a family someday. Like, even though I had told myself, like, if you transition, you should understand it's maybe possible that you'll never have a partner. But I didn't want to close that door if I didn't have to. And so I did that. And then we were together for 6 or 7 years, and had gotten married about 5 or 6 years ago. And then we decided to have a kid. And luckily we were in a position to do IVF. And we tried once before and it failed. And then on the second time, my partner, Kelsey, was able to get pregnant. And now we have a little girl she's genetically mine and she's genetically my wife's. And yeah, that's how it went.
Amazing. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
You know, it's like you're living the dream. You created your reality. And that's why I tell people that don't understand the concept of manifestation. You manifest your world. When you get out of that religiosity and that fear-based thinking, and you just understand the power that you have as an individual, you know, it's amazing the things that you can create, you know, and it's wonderful. You know, it's definitely.
I love that you said that. And, you know, the idea of manifestation gets thrown around a lot in like New Age, and sometimes it's, I think, leveraged in weird ways by, you know, certain types of like woo-woo practitioners. But for me, manifestation has meant the letting go of fear. And every time I've been able to do that in my life, things change for me in really profound ways that I'm not expecting. But it always takes a facing of a long-standing fear. And so, like, throughout my transition, I feel like one thing I've realized is, like, when I come up against those circumstances where I'm really scared of something, like, those are the things I need to move toward and try and overcome directly. Because when you do that, that's when things really change. That's when the blocks that have existed in your life start to move, because they were there because you had a lot of unresolved fears. And maybe you knew about the top part of the fear, but you didn't know about all the fear living under the surface. And as you start to actually face it head on, a lot of those underlying fears are cleared away. And those were the things that were blocking you from, I guess, achieving or becoming what you're really looking to become. And it's not like transitioning solved everything for me, but it did allow me to take the next step and get past the things that were holding me back at that point in my life. I certainly still have fears and have to face those fears and continue doing the same thing that I did when I decided to transition, to continue improving myself. But through the experience of deciding to transition, I feel like I see it more clearly that fear is always the blocker to manifesting a better reality for yourself.
You're breaking old programming and creating new ones and creating the world that you want. That's what manifestation does. And although a lot of people may think it's woo-woo, but there is a field, a quantum field that we all tap into, you know, because we're energy. If you really like, even science, science explains it, how we can alter our genes. We could alter just about anything, and it's not woo-woo. It's been backed up with science. And as you say, you get rid of that fear, you get rid of that block, and you're going to allow a new life, a new way of being to take place. And we are living proof of that, that we have created our reality. We have created our world, you know, and that scares a lot of people. You know, we would have been burned at the stake for sure back in the day, you know.
We would have been.
I think that, for me, what I wanted to manifest in this life was how to experience authentic love. For me, it was superior to find out how that was going to be expressed in my life. And I was taught from an early age about the unconditional love of God, and, you know, told that this is like love everlasting and everything. And I think I came into this experience wanting to try it out to see if it was true. And somewhere along life, I realized, after having been married the first time, and my spouse at the time, she was definitely like, one of the greatest things that she would say was like, and God, let our boys be boys and our girls be girls. Amen. And it was like, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. Because somewhere along the line here, I'm going to have to let this person know what's going on. And after transitioning and meeting Mark in a hospital, after having broken my back and having a terrible spinal injury from a car accident, I met unconditional love. I met authentic love because he didn't care what I looked like, and I was a mess. I had just had a hair transplant, and I had burned my hair. I think it was trying to bleach it or something. It was like orange and gross, and I was just like absolutely destroyed as a person. But this person here just reached down and just lifted me up and helped me heal miraculously from four broken bones in my neck and from a spinal injury. And he's been my example that I was looking for. And we've been married now for 7 years, over 7 years. And finally, we're at a place where we can be free, from religion and all that repression and everything. So I'm just grateful that I did get the chance.
That's wonderful. And it's only possible because you were being your authentic self for him to love, right? And that's the same situation for me. Like, I could have had all the love in the world, been the most adored person in my family, in my community. I could have been the most popular celebrity ever, and it still would never have felt real to me because I would have always known that they didn't love me. They loved the person that I was presenting myself as, which was really just a version that I thought they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a satisfying way to live, and it's not possible to have an authentic relationship if that's the state that you're in, because you'll run into situations like you just mentioned where it becomes blatantly obvious that the expectation that the person has of who you are and the reason they love you is because you're fulfilling the expectation and not because they actually love you. And maybe it's not their fault. Maybe it's because you've never shown you to them yet. But in order to experience that authentic love, you need to show your true self. And that's why trans people who are trans need to transition, because they need to be able to experience that. That's like a core human thing that every person needs, is to be loved authentically for who they are unconditionally. And you can't be loved unconditionally if you're hiding part of yourself.
And I think we are showing the world a path, a way of being. I think it's an evolution of our species, and we're like the front runners, to show people to be free to be who they are, to be authentic, to take chances and fight away that fear. And although they don't look at us now like they used to look at us back in the day, where we were considered healers and teachers and just really wise people, and they would look for our advice. Now they, like I said, if they could burn us at the stake, they would. I think that eventually people will realize our importance. And if I bring a message to the community, is that be proud of who you are, be happy, don't let anybody bring you down, be grateful that you're living in the times that you're living now, that you're capable of transitioning, that you're capable of doing the things that you do to your body to be as authentic as you can be.
I completely agree with that. I think though trans people are generally living difficult lives, there's a gift to it as well, if you look for it. And I think the reason that trans people in different cultures have been seen in this role of healer or wisdom, I think it makes sense. And I think it's actually an intuitive conclusion that people come to when they meet trans people. And I think it will persist for that reason. I think that what's been layered on top of it is just fear and control and things like that. And I want trans people to know, especially trans people that haven't come out yet, that living as a trans person is a really unique gift in certain ways. And we can be a bridge between the genders in terms of understanding each other. And, I can't speak for every trans person, but I feel like I do have good insight into how men think and how women think. And I don't think that they're as far apart as people necessarily assume. I think a lot of the differences between men and women are imagined, and the problems that men and women face. They all face a lot of similar things. And there's more that we can come together on, I think, than we are different. And so I'd love to see trans people seen more of as a bridge between an understanding of men and women and the experiences that men and women have and the things that they go through, and not be used as a weapon to divide men and women or to entrench gender roles in a certain specific way. I want to see trans people used as examples of how people can live unique and yet equally valuable lives, and that our existence is a contribution in and of itself. And it'll take a while to get there, but ups and downs along the way, but I think we will get there.
I think so.
Yeah, I think that the key there is to recognize that we are unique, we are special. We're somewhere along the middle of that gender spectrum, where male and female kind of mesh and stuff. And we should be proud of it. We should be honoring of it, of having this gift, of having been able to, like for Mark's case, have been able to live as a woman for 38 years and then to transform into the most authentic version of a man that I would have ever seen in my life. Mm-hmm. And that is something that is a tremendous gift, to be able to have that kind of insight, to understand and walk in those two roles and to actually reflect it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. Once you understand that and stop living in fear and guilt and shame and all that stuff that we go through, and I've been through all that, God knows. But once you get through the other side, it's refreshing when you finally make peace with yourself. And that's where I'm at right now. And like I said in the beginning of the show, you really helped put a lot of things in perspective in my mind. You gave me peace. You gave me the ability to see things. And, so you work your magic there.
That means a lot to me. I think as I was transitioning, the mantra in my head was always be kind to yourself. Just be kind to yourself. Treat yourself with grace. Take it step by step, and really realize that you do have worth. We all do. Every single human being. Actually, one of my friends prior to coming out said to me once, and it always stuck with me. He was always the type of person that was incredibly outgoing, to an extent that I couldn't even fathom because I'm somewhat introverted. He would make friends with any person, just any random stranger on the street. And he said to me, the way that he views it is that every single person has something to teach us. It doesn't matter who they are. And it's just coming from him, because I knew the way that he lived his life and the type of person he was, it just felt so honest to me. And it really clicked with me. And I think that sort of realization was maybe part of what helped me to transition without beating myself up too much. That I knew that me, along with every other person, no matter their experience, no matter how bizarre or strange or outside of the norm people thought that they were, there's something to learn from that experience, from that person's life. And I guess I saw that for myself, that every step that I took towards being more myself was getting closer to being able to provide more value to the world. The uniqueness of my experience, the struggles that I was going through, the fears that I was overcoming. If I could come out of it the other side with a sense of gratitude and self-love, that I would add just that much more to the world. And so meeting people like the two of you who have struggled at times and had similar experiences to what I've had, but in some ways had struggles that I haven't had also. Seeing you come around to a feeling of wanting to love yourself and knowing that you're worthy of that love without it being a religious thing, just knowing in your heart that you have value and that your experience is uniquely valuable. that's what I want all trans people to feel. That, yeah, maybe the world thinks we're weird. Maybe the world thinks we're bizarre. The choices that we make don't make any sense to them. But there's a value here if they look for it. And that's how I kind of look at it now. That I just want to fulfill that value by continuing to see myself in a positive way as someone who's living an experience in life that is valuable to the world.
And you will, just by living, just by being you, just by existing, just by carrying on in your everyday life, your interactions with your partner and with your daughter and stuff. Is just going to be a beautiful unfolding that the world will be able to see that, and it's.
And then when you come across some old fart like me on Twitter, you could help, take him out of that shameful nature that I was heading down a pretty awful path.
Yeah, I was at the point where I was like, this doesn't work. I mean, it's like, this is not working for us. You could do so much better. And I was like, because he had taught me spirituality things that I never even had been exposed to ever. So here I was being exposed to, all these other modalities and things that I didn't know about. And he's like caught my bad habit.
Yeah, because she was the Christian and I was the shaman healer, whatever people, call New Age, which it's not New Age. It's been around way before just all the other religion. Paganism. I mean, I've had ability since I was a kid. And all of a sudden, all the Christianity stuff stuck on me. And I'm like, oh, we've got to do this like the Lord says. And it's like, I don't know what happened.
I mean, within like a couple months after we met, he's like, I need to detransition so that I could be acceptable for your kids. And I'm like, you don't have to do that.
It's very difficult, especially when you're raised religiously, to like pick it apart and really like fully understand all of the fear and the motivations behind the fear. And I can certainly see how that can happen and why it happened to you, especially when there are more people now that are probably being more aggressive and saying really, I think, difficult to hear things, right? Like questioning you on an existential level and expecting that you should have to like defend yourself against their religious ideas. And it ultimately doesn't end up being healthy to try and, as a trans person, to try and live up to a Christian idea of what is good, because you're never going to be good in their eyes. Your authentic self is not okay. And so the best you'll ever get is being like a renouncer of it. And that will never be satisfactory to you either, because it's counter to the truth.
Exactly. And prophecy, the end of day says, hopefully one day society will come together, whatever you are, just accept people for who they are. Exactly. And that's, I think that's what we're here to do, to teach people to be loving, unconditionally loving, accepting, whatever you are, wherever you are on the spectrum. Whether you're gender queer, whether you're fully trans, gay, lesbian, bi, whatever it is, let your light shine, because that's what's going to
let your light shine. That's right.
Yeah.
Especially when it's a situation where you're just living your life, right? Exactly. There's no indoctrination going on here. It's not like trans people are out there proselytizing to cis people. Yeah. Oh, you should try this trans thing. It's really fun. Like, what? No, that doesn't happen. It doesn't make any sense. We're just out here trying to be true to ourselves.
Yeah. Although they do say, that people are grooming and they're trying to convert everybody. It's
the irony is that the grooming has happened for thousands of years within the church. So and they've got a terrible rap sheet already. Yeah. So I don't know why they would use that argument. Well, I do.
Well, I think it's
part of that psyop.
When there's repression, it leaks out, and usually in terrible ways. And you see that in religion, right? The more they try and repress identity or sexuality, the more those sorts of things become the mechanism for abuse. And I think it's why the church especially the Catholic Church, which doesn't allow the priests to marry, which doesn't allow their priests to be gay. Like, that's why it attracts closeted, self-hating people who eventually repeat abuse that they themselves suffered. And it becomes a bad cycle. And then those people feel hateful, and they look for external sources and easy scapegoats. And unfortunately, trans people are a very easy scapegoat, because we're unusual and sensationalized. And so I think religion, especially now, is kind of keyed into this idea that we can be, they can paint us as the fearful object and use it as a way to manipulate people's emotions and the way that they feel about people like us, and then also to improve or entrench their own ideas within their own communities of what male and female and those roles and what sorts of sexualities are or aren't okay.
Exactly. We could talk all night, and I know it's late where you're at. You're 3 hours ahead of us, but we appreciate the time you've given us. Do you have any final words or anything that you would like to end with?
No, I don't think so. I just appreciate the opportunity to talk to two people who I respect. I think you guys are doing something important, especially when you're able to say, like, I held a certain position, I felt a certain way about myself, and then I changed that. And I hope I can do that too. I hope I'm always able to do that I can look at myself with a critical eye, that I can take in other people's opinions and then decide for myself whether or not that's what I want to continue to believe or not. And so I admire that, and I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate you telling me that our conversations on Twitter made a difference to you. And this conversation has made a difference to me. So thank you both.
Thank you. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back next Sunday with Willow. Forget her last name. Starling. Another amazing trans woman, another happy trans woman, because that's what we want to do from now on. Share beautiful and wonderful stories and let people realize that transgender people rock. All right, guys. We love you. But remember to always love yourselves too and each other. Bye-bye. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Oops. There we go.